And here we are, the second day of the Ghana CEO Summit. And ladies and gentlemen, it's made possible by the CEOs Network of Ghana in partnership with Deloitte. And we're graciously sponsored by Fidelity Bank, Prudential Life Insurance, Tigo Business, The Exchange, The Margins Group, AFND International, Universal Container Services and Structures, IBM, Group Ideal, Comfu, Vanguard Assurance, Puma Energy, ANC Development, Atlas Rent-A-Car, Omni Bank, Enterprise Life, SGSSB, APSA Power Generation, AXA, I beg your pardon, Power Generation, West Blue Consult, Nielsen, Surfline, MultiChoice, NALEM, Delta Airlines, MTN, First Bank, Vodafone, Herbalife, Apollonia, Zenith Bank, Def Traffic Plus, Goyle, Busy, Managing Ghana, UT Life, Stallion Group, Acritic Ghana, Shell Card, Specialized, Top Core Security, Barclays Ghana, Global Access, Engine, Melcom, Maris Terminal, Innisfly, ASCO, your total logistics partner, Star FM, DDP, iStream Live, Ghana Web, Daily Graphic, GBC, Joy FM, Multimedia, My Joy Online, Joy FM, Impact Hub, Deloitte, Kempinski, IVET, and the Oxford Business Group. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for all our sponsors and partners. And this is where I see the coffee break wasn't enough. But ladies and gentlemen, for the next few inspirational hours that we're going to be here, we're going to really enjoy some amazing presentations and panel discussions centered around the overall theme that we're reflecting on, the digital innovation economy for business growth. But now we delve into development and leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a very rich panel which would last no more than 30 minutes at most. To do us the honors, ladies and gentlemen, as our moderator, please welcome broadcast journalist and a communication specialist, Madam Kemini Amanor. And she'll be joined by a very distinguished panel, which would comprise Madam Christine Evans-Klock, Professor Paolo Galizzi, Ambassador Elkanah Odembo, Madam Fatimah Alimohamed, Mr. Girmay Haile, Lawyer Kofi Abotsi, and ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause once again for our moderator, Madam Kemini Amanor. Madam Moderator, you have 30 minutes to engage your panel and 15 to engage the audience.
Well, good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kemini Amanor, like I was introduced. I'll just reintroduce my panelists quickly. To my immediate left is Christine Evans-Klock. She's UN Resident Coordinator for Ghana. Next to her is Dr. Kofi Abotsi. He's Dean of the GIMPA Law School, Kofi Abotsi. And next to him is CEO of Africa Brand Warrior, Fatimah Alimohamed. Girmay Haile, I got the name right, absolutely, is with UNDP. He is country director with UNAIDS, I beg your pardon. Next to him is, let me get that quickly, is Ambassador Elkanah Odembo. He is country director for CARE International Ghana. And last but not least is Professor Paolo Galizzi. And he is Professor of Law at the Fordham Law School. He's also Director of the Sustainable Development Legal Initiative. Obviously, a very packed panel. The sight of them alone makes my palms sweat. But I'm sure we'll have a good conversation. When the Sustainable Development Goals were launched, a friend of mine said that, look, the MDGs came and went, left us like that, replaced by the SDGs, and perhaps by the end of 2030, we'll have the YDGs. I don't know what the Y stands for, do not ask me. But perhaps that'll be the premise for the conversation today. And I'll start with you, Chris, if you don't mind. Do you side, to what extent do you think that this comment made by this friend of mine holds truth? To what extent?
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased that this summit includes SDGs on your agenda for your precious time together. I look forward to hearing the experience and ideas that you have in being able to turn this to reality. And I think the name of this panel, going from the potential to realizing that for prosperity, is very much the key right now, because this is what it's about. It's about bringing about change for Ghanaians. It's about bringing change for economic growth and protecting our planet, all at the same time. That's one interlinked, integral goal. It's not about cherry picking between them. And I think this is the real difference from the MDGs, which focus primarily on social development. And the Sustainable Development Agenda doesn't just add to that. It really understands that in order to have social development, in order to combat extreme poverty, we have to have prosperity. We have to have development in a way that protects our planet. So I don't know if having 17 goals seems daunting, but you can remember them a little bit easier in terms of the 5 Ps. It's about people, it's about prosperity, so that's about industrialization, agriculture modernization, it's about prosperity, and it's about peace. I think anybody who lives in Ghana could not possibly understate the importance that peaceful transitions of power means for business and for growth. And it means protecting the planet. So we have to do all this in a way that doesn't make it more difficult for our grandchildren to develop. The 5th P is about how we do it, which is partnership. And this, I think, is a key topic for you, because we understand that partnership is not just between countries and regions. It's about engaging the private sector as a full partner in development that benefits them. It's about making the business case for sustainable development. I think we heard some great examples of that in the previous panel about how important it is for business to make sure that women have opportunities to tap their creativity, their strength in order to grow businesses. I think another really important way for the business world to think about the Sustainable Development Agenda is in this integrated, mutually dependent approach. And the one thing that I think that business could make the biggest difference here in Ghana on the Sustainable Development Agenda is looking at youth. It's looking about skills. My own personal hypothesis is that as the government now brings about change in stability in exchange rates, macroeconomic conditions, interest rates, utilities, one of the next big barriers for business is going to be the skills gap for achieving business productivity. And I think this is where you can see the interconnectedness of the Sustainable Development Agenda. We cannot achieve prosperity with high youth unemployment. We cannot employ youth unless they have good education and good health at the beginning. We need to have vocational training that gives young people different ways of learning skills. And we need to have good jobs on the other side of that that are productive and that make it possible for businesses to be resilient and to grow. So that's where you can see the connections between the different 17 Sustainable Development Goals to add up for prosperity for Ghana.
Could African governments not have achieved this without necessarily signing up for the SDGs? Fatimah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I sit on this panel with very intellectually attuned individuals, and the whole theme of this summit is about disruption. So I'm going to be a little disruptive. Yes, the SDGs are there. It's a great project. It's a great milestone. We've moved away from it being ended in 2015 and now 2030, and we'll continue doing things. While I believe in its essence and what it stands for, I really believe that it misses the whole crux in terms of what we're trying to create for the future. It's absolutely great, great work that has been done by the team, even in Ghana, including what UNAIDS is doing. But when I just look at basics and fundamental basics, we've missed out on what we want to create for the future. because this is all about the future. 2030, whether we're going to be there or not, we don't know. Changes are happening every day, and all the changes that we get to see, which probably are projected to us mainly through the digital world, is all negative. There's nothing positive coming out. Whether it's about chemical attacks in Syria, whether it's about what happened today in Manchester, whether it's about kids getting shot in America, what does the core essence stand out in this is that we're missing out on the poverty of morals, poverty of values, poverty of being able to know the difference between good and right, poverty of knowledge. This is where poverty is. It's not about, riches. There's a big difference between being rich and being wealthy. We're wealthy people. We have families, we have health, we have a lot of things. But it's not something that we expect governments to do for us. I'm very happy with what David talked about today. It's all about mindsets. It's all about changes. We can't expect, for example, the government here to force people to use toilets. I remember going into Makola after seeing the BBC Africa story on Ghana's seas being contaminated, because SDGs is all about the environment as well, and I spoke to people. They're not willing to pay 50 pesos to use the toilet. So is this something that government is going to enforce? Is this something that the UN is going to come enforce? It is something that we have to be able to understand, that it starts from our own morals and values. So I would like to see something that comes in terms of addressing the poverty of the morals and values. We have a poor man in London who sits in the tube begging, the very same way we have an African man sitting here and begging. So why is that called the first world and the developed world, and we're still developing? When do we stop becoming a developed nation?
Haile, at what point do the SDGs take into consideration how it trickles down, as Fatimah has said, to the individual in the respective countries?
Yes, that is the issue just raised. How do we move from commitment to action? And governments, first of all, need to start to contextualize what this whole thing means for their countries. And then in that contextualization, they also need to understand that there is the need for a more integrated approach in terms of programs, financing, and also planning. And also create an enabling environment where no one is left behind. It means harnessing all possible energies and capacities in the country to move forward. When you are talking about something like this that is discussed at the global level and agreed at the global level, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a top-down issue, but it is an issue that has nevertheless been discussed at the international level, agreed at the international level to set certain benchmarks, and then start to see how we all can race towards the finish line. There are some very ambitious targets that have been set, like, for example, ending the AIDS epidemic by 2030, a very, very ambitious thing. This is something that has claimed the lives of more than 40 million people and is still threatening the lives of 30 million people as directly being affected, and maybe if you multiply that by 4 or 5 to see how many more are affected by it. And then economies definitely are also affected by it, and many other diseases like that, for example. So the road towards achieving this at the national level does require a lot of thinking. I mean, I'll give you one simple example. Between 2004 and 2014, this is the decade in which we say that Africa has shown a lot of progress. The GDP growth had really gone up. But in this period of time, we were able to create 1.7% employment opportunities, which is about 100 million or so people that have come into the job market. But the people who are seeking jobs going forward is about 3% annually. That is the growth. And now since 2014, the world economy has shifted, and so now we are saying this relatively slow progress or slow development ahead of us. So how do you expect to achieve higher level of employment or livelihoods for people when what we can achieve during the height of our GDP growth progress decade was only 1.7%? Now translate that into all aspects: gender, education, do we even simply question education? Is it really adequately linked to progress, to economy, to science, to technology? Is the kind of education that we are offering, that is sapping a lot of our resources, by the way, in each country, really contributing towards this ambitious growth that we're talking about? So this is where now it helps when you have a community of nations talking about the same challenges, and also talking about how to redistribute resources to be able to jumpstart certain development agendas that countries can have, will start to make sense. Because at this stage we're talking about, since nobody needs to be left behind, that means nations, peoples, and groups, we are also talking about a shared responsibility at the global level, and a global commitment also to achieve this. So the challenges are no more greater at the international level than they would be at the national level. But the whole point of contextualizing the issues, to be able to define what are the needs at the country level, is where now the real challenge is for governments.
So Kofi, at the national level, how do we ensure, enforceability? How do we ensure that these this web of 17 goals and 169 targets are actually, worked on? How do we integrate it in our policies?
Well, first of all, I think we need to recognize the fact that every aspect of the Sustainable Development Goals are already ongoing, and they have been ongoing before they actually were encapsulated in the concept of goals. The difference here is that they are supposed to be predicated on the concept of sustainability. And so we have to ensure that whatever programs and policies that are being implemented by government, these are placed in the context of sustainability and the values that are espoused by these goals. Now, I'm just going to say very quickly that the biggest threat to the enforcement of the Sustainable Development Goals in Ghana is political short-termism, what I call political short-termism. The tendency for us to have major and radical shifts and changes in policies simply because there are new governments in office. The fact that education has to radically change because there's a new government in office, and the fact that our policies cannot outlast governments. The essence of sustainability is to ensure that we have transgenerational or intergenerational policy orientation, and that programming or these programs or projects outlast specific generations. So I think the biggest threat in this particular area is political short-termism. Now, to quickly relate this in the concept of Ghana, in the context of Ghana, I would also add that there has been attempts, actually since 2015, by the National Development Planning Commission to articulate and to ensure that there's a practical rollout of these goals. The question is, how effective have they been? The question is, how effective is the National Development Planning Commission itself? Has it been? The NDPC, which is supposed to be, as it were, the technical agency helping in the implementation of development policies in Ghana, is on the periphery of national development planning in Ghana, and often is not even consulted on key development issues. And so in terms of being serious to this, and in terms of demonstrating our commitment to this, I think that Ghana can do better if we mainstream these goals. But in mainstreaming them, we have to ensure that we understand the values and the visions that inform these. So if you take, for example, the issue of education, I think for some time, the priority has been on the production, and quote and unquote, the production of numbers, and to ensure a certain accessibility of persons to primary education. But the quality of education has been lacking. And everyone is clear on this, that there's been very little demonstration of commitment to quality education. If you take the question of health, similar concerns can be identified in that area. But just to, wind up my statement here in this area, respect, because I understand we have a big panel, I would just want us to probably practicalize the issue of the SDGs. Sometimes there's a danger of people thinking it's really up there. It's one of those mainstream UN goals. It's lofty. And the United Nations itself is such a big entity. Sometimes there's a tendency of just feeling so divorced or detached from the UN. And that's why I started by saying that the goals are here. We have all of them. Poverty reduction has always been there. The former NDC government, I think, had the Vision 2020. And then we had the poverty reduction strategy by the World Bank under the former NPP government. We have another policy. We keep changing these policies, and they don't seem to be synced with each other. So moving forward, poverty reduction is a reality. Poverty is a reality. We still have 109 people in Africa, 109 million people in Africa, who live in extreme poverty. We still have 42.8 people who live under $1 a day in Africa. In Ghana, the numbers are similar. Moving forward, the realities are there, and I think commitments have been demonstrated over the years, but there's policy incoherences appear to be the major difficulty, and I think if we're able to link that to the values and visions of the MDGs, of the SDGs, the SDGs will become real, and the average person can relate to that.
Paolo, you've been doing a lot of work on, sustainable development, legal initiatives, especially on African governments. Why do you think there is the tendency that African governments or African countries seem a bit detached from the SDGs, so that they think, well, let's be good boys and girls for the UN so that we can get what we need to get?
Let me first of all, good afternoon. One of the
I think your microphone is off.
Sorry, it's off. I think it's on now. Oh, it's not working. All right. First of all, good afternoon. And let me go back to the original question, and was the MDGs have failed? I think it's a wrong assumption. The MDGs have actually worked for some people and haven't worked for others. There's actually been a massive reduction in poverty that was driven by the Millennium Development Goals. And in the lives of many individuals around the world, that means that they are alive today, that they are productive life because of a decision that was made in Lofty, New York. One of the things that we need to do and talk a lot about the Sustainable Development Goals is to relate them to every single one in here. And when you look at the 17 goals, you will probably see that there are things that you're either doing already or thinking about doing already. We may probably call something else so that they don't look so terrifying and intimidating, but it really is about what Ban Ki-moon said is a plan for this world. Essentially, they asked him, do you have plan B if this doesn't work? And his answer was, we don't have planet B. There's only this one. And I think all of us, whether we're businessmen, academics, NGOs, need to start thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals as something that can be concrete and can be achievable. And for business leaders, I think the big change for me with the SDG is that there is the realization that much of the change that is needed is not going to come from government. It's going to come from people like you in this room, people that on a daily basis have to think about how to stay alive, how to adapt, how to change your business, how to innovate, how to look forward. You're already thinking about 2030 because you want to be in business in 2030. And to be in business, we need to make sure that climate change is not going to completely destroy what you built. You need to make sure that we're going to have to change the way we do certain things. It means that you may want to have, instead of 10 million Ghanaian customers to buy your goods, you want to have 30 million Ghanaian customers. So to me, I would like to focus more on the positives, on the opportunities that the SDGs offer. It's not a negative agenda. It's not an anti-business agenda. It's an agenda to come up with new ideas, to live in the century that we have, with the problems that we have. And in some ways, I would say Africa leads the way. Think about the revolution that the telecommunication industry has actually made in this country or in this continent. I was looking at examples in Kenya, for example, where the banking system no longer exists, has been totally supplemented by mobile money, and is extremely effective, it is extremely efficient. So for the business community and the business leader that I hear, I would really like for you to think about these as something that is an opportunity rather than a negative as it is often perceived.
So it brings me back to the point. I don't know how many businesses would put up objectives and then at the back of their mind, they're thinking of the SDGs as well. And so how do we deal with that detachment from the SDGs, considering private sector will play a critical role in whether or not we achieve the SDGs by the end of 2030? Paolo.
Okay. Yes. Well, to be more specific, I think businesses have gone to a transition, and I would describe it as in 4 phases. The first phase was the phase where Professor Ajay reminded us today, where essentially, what is the job of business? Milton Friedman in 1970 said, to make money for shareholders. I don't think that that is tenable anymore. There's been a second phase where businesses have gone to understand that they do have social responsibility, and it has become very common. I would think probably everybody here does a lot of charitable work, foundation work, assists and lives in society in different ways. There's a third phase that we're seeing at the moment where businesses think about environmental issues, human rights issues as a risk assessment. You just want to evaluate the potential risk for your operations of, for example, water scarcity, climate change. What the Sustainable Development Goal is trying to do is to bring us into the fourth phase, which is essentially trying to make those value-creating goals. In other words, how can I make money out of the challenges that I face? And let me tell you, an institution like Goldman Sachs, which is not known as a charitable institution or an institution that is particularly interested in the values that I'm talking about, they have a climate change report. They have a human rights report. They are looking at human rights policies because they want to be able to advise their client to make money today, 10 years from now, 30 years from now. So what I'm saying is that those things are happening, and we're now moving to the value creation, and the SDGs are making us think about these things. And many companies are starting to have environmental policies, human rights policies. Virtually all companies have corporate and social responsibility agendas that are trying to incorporate those values into their business model.
Odembo, the companies Paolo mentioned, obviously, don't exist here in Ghana, as in half of them is headquartered here in Ghana. But we expect the private sector in Ghana to play a role in, our achieving of the SDGs at the national level. Now, coming from the civil society point of view, how do you think that the local Ghanaian business person could play a role in, achieving the SDG?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to follow on to what the good professor has just said about, and to challenge Freeman's position that the business of business is to make a profit. And I think the gentleman who spoke after the professor spoke in the earlier panel made that very clear, and the professor is repeating the same. Business cannot thrive in the absence of communities that are thriving. It is in the interest of business for communities where you're doing business. You can't make the profits if you don't have the people who make those services and who generate those goods. You can't make a profit if there aren't people, if there aren't consumers for those services and the goods that you generate. So your profits are determined and dependent on the goodwill of the citizens and the communities, as it were, whether as your employees or as the people who purchase the services and the goods that you produce, etc., etc. So I think for most businesses, they now know that if you want to be sustainable, if you want to do your business in a sustainable manner, that it is in your interest that you pay attention to the people who work for you, the communities in which you do your business, and the people who consume the services and the goods that you produce. And so the Sustainable Development Goals are saying to us, look, the world today is wealthier than it has ever been before. We are very fortunate. But there's a very significant number of people who live in abject poverty. And this is not acceptable. It is not in the interest of anybody for so many people, and especially on this continent, to live in abject poverty. It takes away our dignity. And the things that we do, most of us in the NGO sector, we are about, the basic needs. Do people have food? Do they have water? Do they have education? Do they have access to water? These are the very basic things that make all of us have a life of dignity. And Fatimah is talking about the issues of morality. I think poverty is a moral issue. It is an issue that we must say as a global community, as Haile has said. The global community has come together and said, and has agreed on these 17 goals, and said, we need to achieve these goals together. It is in all of us, in all our interest, for us to achieve this goal. We will be a much better place for everybody if we can achieve these goals. And so the different sectors, government has a very important role. The private sector has a critical role. They are the ones who create wealth, they grow economies, they make things happen. Civil society have a role. We, as civil society, non-governmental organizations in this country, we've already created this platform to deal with these issues of SDGs. We have already mapped out the whole country. We have an infrastructure as NGOs that covers all the 216 districts in this republic. But we also know that we must do this in partnership with the United Nations, with the development partners, with the universities, with the government. So we work very closely with the National Development Planning Commission. We work very closely with the Ghana Statistical Services. We need to be able to monitor and to count on a yearly basis or however frequently we want to do it. Are we making changes? Are we moving towards achieving these goals? Or are we going to wait until 2030 and say, oh, it looks like we're not going to make it, so we need to come up with another 15 years to address these goals?
Haile.
I see an opportunity.
I think the ambassador really raised quite fundamental issues, and I just want to add on to them. For example, the SDGs today talk about corruption as one of the major development issues, which during the MDGs we did not discuss about. We talked about governance, we talked about the potentials of people. That's what we are talking about now, nobody should be left behind, the potentials of people. If I take the example of Ghana today, this is an economy that has been declared by IMF and World Bank as a middle-income economy. What does that mean? Basically, it means this economy has a capacity to generate wealth that puts you in that category. But if you look at this wealth that is generated, how much of it is circulating back into the economy? Then you have an issue there. That imbalance has created multinational companies or enterprises that are operating in the country to always walk away with multiple profits, while the national enterprises are not even getting the businesses. This definitely will continue to skew the whole discussion of SDGs and its achievement in Ghana. If what Ghana is doing is working to achieve, and then in the end the profits are not shared by the country, then we have a global problem. Another example is Galamsey, $7 billion. This is, I'm sure whoever was counting was able to just count that. I personally believe it's more than that. But in just this one year, 2016, $7 billion worth of wealth has gone out of this country. Ghana is $7 billion poorer. And not only that, even more poorer with all the environmental and other damages that are caused as a result of Galamsey. So this is the advantage and the point. I mean, we should not see, like my colleague said, we should not see SDG as a totally different package of its own, but it is an integral part of what we have been doing, what we have been trying to achieve, and what we need to be doing at this level. And the business community is now where the question is, where do they come in right now on this?
Indeed. Chris, I'll take a quick comment from you, and then we'll take questions from the gathering.
I just want to build on what the ambassador in Girmay said, that the SDGs are not a top-down strategy. They weren't developed by a group of diplomats or UN civil servants behind closed doors. Towards the end of the MDGs, there was a huge process to help, especially young people, articulate the world they wanted. What was their vision? It started with the understanding that where the MDGs made the most success, they were owned at the local level. not just in achieving them and advocating, but in holding us all accountable, business, government, the UN alike, for making a difference. And I think this is a huge advantage for Ghana in this CSO platform for the SDGs that the ambassador explained. That's a huge asset for Ghana, because this is about a bottoms-up demand for the future that should belong to everybody. And it's not about generating growth and then having it benefit people. It's about who participates in generating that growth and therefore has a stake in it and gets a return from it. It's about leaving no one behind because of who participates. And I think that is why the Secretary General appointed former President Mahama to co-chair his group of SDG advocates on the implementation phase, because Ghana had taken a leadership role in the development phase. And now President Akufo-Addo is now also the co-chair of this group of advocates, which includes athletes and artists and academics, but it also includes the CEO of Unilever and includes the head of Alibaba, because it recognizes that businesses are a catalyst for change for the same sustainable development agenda. And as Girmay has said, it creates the conditions for which businesses can thrive. So I just want to make that point, that businesses are part of the solution, but that it was a bottom-up generation of envisioning the future that we all want.
I just want to chip in something before, if you allow. Yeah, just quickly, the reason why SDGs are important for corporate entities, and I'm just going to tie that in with what Professor Galizzi said. I'm sure many of us are still wondering, you know, what an academic discussion. Probably going to suddenly admire everything that has been discussed in the last couple of days, from yesterday. But it's important for us to remember that any company which violates the SDGs, assuming we don't even call it SDGs, but we call them, you know, good principles of whatever, they've always been around. Any company that violates them is not a good company, and therefore that company may be violating the principles of good corporate citizenship. Every company today wants to be a good corporate citizen, that you do the right things, and therefore you do not pollute the environment. The reason Galamsey has become what it is because we accept that Galamsey is a violation of the basic principles of good corporate practices. Environmental externality, we are destroying the environment, we do not care about the consequences of our actions. I'll take the key example. Today, many companies are concerned about the supply chain. And therefore, there are issues about whether you employ child labor, whether you employ slavery in your supply chain, whether you indulge in things that are internationally not accepted as good labor practices. So a company, for example, that employs children is violating the principles of education under the SDGs. And that's why I started by saying that every aspect of the SDGs can actually be appropriated into the regular things that we do. So if you take water, companies who pollute water in the course of their production are violating the SDGs, but they are violating things that are not supposed to be done, whether or not you call them SDGs. And so I think just as a way of understanding the SDGs, that an integrated development framework within which we can understand the concept and notion of development moving forward, so that once that is predicated on that, then Ghana joins the other community of nations in implementing the principles of development from one standpoint, as opposed to the haphazard way that it used to be. You know, different countries were doing different things because they understood development differently. So I just want us to at least appreciate this from the standpoint that the SDGs are daily, regular things, and the violations of the things that we do on a daily basis basically just makes us bad corporate citizens.
Now, while the microphone goes round, I just want to also make the point. It appears then that we will need a system, you know, that can network all of these goals and then bring it down to the level of businesses, to the level of that individual at home. What kind of system do we need at the country level, Fatimah, to be able to do this?
National Development Planning Commission.
We actually have the National Planning Development Chair in the House, so hopefully when he comes on board, he'll be able to talk on this. But what is coming out, and I can see consensus, is just that we're talking top, bottom down. I happen to be a person who walks markets. So when I speak from a layman and common man perspective, because I would to believe that if we're able to get the common man to understand things in the simplest of ways, then only can we achieve what we want to achieve. Yes, SDG is happening. It's happening in different phases. Yes, you know, chief executives have to play a role. My question is, we have the one district, one factory coming in, for example. Do we really think that we can make that achievable? Yes, I do believe. Is the government committed in wanting to make a difference and be a part of the SDG? Like Christine did say, you know, we have the past president, we have the current president working on this. At least this is the one part we do not have the blame game going on, you know, who did what better. It's the interest of the common man, and the whole panel discussion is about prosperity for the common man. That's where we want to get to. So my question is there a way, as we do this one district, one factory, we don't make it about businesses and CEOs and profit, which is what, you know, we've been talking about, and exactly what Ambassador said, and what David said earlier. It's about how can we bend down to lift somebody else up. How do I see this happening? We do go ahead with this one district, one factory, but we make the whole value chain stakeholders in that factory. Today, factories are not able to get raw material. I know I was talking to somebody about the cashew industry. I sit as the vice chair of the agric sector on AGI. And one of the challenges we have is, for example, if I talk cashew alone, we have 11 factories in Ghana and only 2 operational. 9 are shut down. 50,000 tons of nuts in Ghana. Only 15,000 tons was procured last year, which clearly shows that farmers are losing in the process. Everybody's very busy trying to get their kids to become engineers and become doctors. Who can put their hand on their hearts today and say that I am willing for my son and daughter to become a farmer? We are all sitting here today because we're grateful for that farmer. So my question comes to, is there a way with the one factory, you know, one district, one factory, where we get a farmer to be a stakeholder, we get the logistics to be a stakeholder, we get the fertilizer individuals to be a stakeholder. So this way, as the company grows, each one knows that they are playing a role in making it successful. So it becomes an all-inclusive approach, and this is something that the government can definitely look at.
I think we can take our first question now. 3 questions.
Questions, contributions, suggestions, even a prophecy will be allowed.
My problem with international decisions to affect nations is the cross between community interest and selfish interest. Now, they say water finds its own level. It will flow to find its own level. If we are practicing the market system, then capital will flow to a place like Ghana that don't have enough capital, and then development can take place. But then you turn around, you see individual countries making regulations that make the flow of that capital impossible. So I think for a nation like Ghana, at some point, you need to be a bit selfish. And as Mr. Abotsi is saying, these 17 or so objectives are things that nations will do, are things that companies will do, are things that individuals have interest in doing. So I think the focus has to be within Ghana, what are the areas that we can use to leverage ourselves and get out of poverty? And yesterday, I think we talked a lot about that. So the focus has to be your internal strength that you can use to build up. And then after you build up, you can play in the international community to leverage even higher up. So let's make sure that the individuals that we say are poor, policies make them become their own method of transformation. If they can see things they can do to transform themselves, not to legislate from somewhere else to impose ways of behavior on them, that becomes almost impossible. So the way to go forward, I believe, is inside looking, understanding the strength, the resources we have, leveraging on those, and getting progress for ourselves. Thank you.
The last two.
Hi, my name is Fatimah Tambajang, and I'm a business analyst. I have a background in both economics and development. I haven't heard much about the diaspora. I think the gentleman earlier spoke about it. I think it can't be ignored in terms of sustainable development. Last year, the diaspora contributed $177 billion to the African economy. And we're talking about technology. How can we tap into this money? Because so far, RIA and MoneyGram are the only ones that are allowing for it to happen. And migrants actually pay the most money to transfer funds. We're paying around 11 to 12%. In Mexico, this is just a suggestion, the government has a system where you pay remittances through the government, and then the government charges something like 6%, and they use it to fuel development projects. So I mean, any thoughts on that would be great, how to make the diaspora involved.
Thank you very much. So looking at the 17 SDGs, we can see that it's really very, very important for every organization and for the nation at large. My question is, how is it being communicated so that it's broken down for every organization to understand and to know where we are going with it? Because I know that in the schools, they are learning and hearing about the SDGs. But what about for example, Ghana's informal sector? What do they know? What do they care about SDGs? Do they even understand what is going on so that they can appreciate it and be part of the process for us to be able to achieve those goals?
Thank you very much. Madam Moderator, I'll always break the rule just for Lucy Quist.
Thank you, Jerry. I think I was on an earlier panel, so please forgive me. I won't introduce myself again. You know, I liked a lot of what lawyer Dochi said. Abotsi, sorry, my apologies. I have a fundamental issue with this anchoring we seem to have, right? If you listen to the national discourse of developed countries, why aren't they talking about SDG at every turn? Why don't they talk about these organizations at every turn? Why do we abdicate our responsibility of growing our own countries and our own nations based on an agenda which partly speaks to our agenda but doesn't entirely speak to our agenda? Why do we do that? When our grandmothers were sending their children to school, they didn't do it on the basis of some development goal. They knew it was the right thing to do. So why aren't we fashioning our discourse and our intent and our plans as leaders to build the prosperity of the country that we are responsible for in the manner and context that's appropriate to our country, as opposed to saying we're going to always align? If someone brings a plan to you, SDG is an example, pick what works for you. But suddenly we're going to go down this route of there's 17 different things that we need to deliver on because apparently this is where the world is going. And this consistently remains the African story. That we are always worried about the path someone else is choosing to chart for us rather than the path that we're charting for ourselves. So my question is, what do we want? What does a prosperous Ghana and a prosperous Africa look like? And where does SDG fit in there? It is not about where do we fit in SDG, it's about where does SDG fit in with us. Because for us in this room, to me, our primary agenda is prosperity for our people first. And anything that doesn't work with that, too bad. If it works with that, then we can talk.
That's exactly what it is.
Madam Moderator, 10 minutes.
I think we'll start off with Lucy. Haile, you can go first.
Yes, thank you. Lucy, if you had an orange hair and a chubby look and you were a male, I would have thought you were coming from the White House or something about our people first. Actually, the SDGs are a result of a dialogue of a community of nations who, in the efforts to break the barriers of development and prosperity, came up with a very aggressive set of goals that nations have been aspiring to achieve. And if you had noticed at the very beginning, my entry, how do we change commitment into action? One is contextualizing this very same set of goals. And as mentioned earlier, a lot of these goals are already the national priorities for many countries anyway. But the point is, how do we make these priorities interlinked, integrated, and that they are all delivering to that aim, which is the prosperity of peoples and nations. So the SDGs are not anybody else's, they're our own. They were drafted. In fact, like Christine said, Ghana was the chair of this global discussion, and I'm surprised even how you were not in that. I thought you were also part of that dialogue, because a lot of CEOs who are top brains in this country were part of that dialogue. So I was assuming that this is something, in fact, for the first time, really pushed and led by nations who are in need of this. And the other thing is, the SDGs are actually, from a business point of view, they are a menu of investment opportunities. In every aspect, in every 17 goal, if you want to invest going into the future up to 2030, this is where the money is going to flow into globally. So this is also a set of investment for many. If I speak, for instance, just one simple example, locally manufacturing pharmaceuticals. If we take the case of HIV alone, in Africa, 96% of our ARV supplies, the generic drugs, come from India and China. 96%. So Africa produces only 4%. Now, the factories in China and India have become so well known and have developed in the markets. Now they are becoming more and more attracted towards the big money pharmaceutical products, and they're going out of production of generic drugs, creating a commodity insecurity for Africa. But then also at the same time, an opportunity for investors in Africa now to jump onto this. Because the money, since this is a lifelong treatment, the money is going to continue to flow into this particular area. So if we look at these one by one, all the 17, definitely you will find a vast area for investment. But locally speaking, the national plan, now the 50-year plan, has integrated the SDGs, contextualized them. They have taken a lot of them, but a lot of them, like I said, were already there, but reinforced with this whole sense of integration. And some of the areas have been highlighted, or they have come out more importantly, like industrialization, improved agriculture, and also education. These are now the three big pillars that we see with this particular government right now. So in terms of owning, I think this is something that we have owned for the first time. The MDGs were slightly different in the way they were prepared, but the SDGs definitely, in fact, it was led through by Ghana and Nigeria. The lady who is now the Deputy Secretary General of the UN was the one also who led this, Fatimah. And the list goes on. And I think for the first time, we're very happy that we had a very strong voice in this, and also that we are the first ones to. And countries, even though they don't talk about it, the big governments, UK, the Americans, they report on them. They do report on them, but maybe they don't talk about them.
Well, Ambassador Odembo, I think you want to say a thing or two about why a country